My name's Wade Dooley. I'm the sixth generation on my family's farm, and we're standing on it right now. We've raised corn and soybeans, small grains, cow-calf beef operation. I also raised a small amount of popcorn, and I did some vegetables for a while, in and out of that some years. We do custom hay and custom seeding, and I also raise the small grains for cover crop seed. We've been doing cover crops on our farm since '97. Started into it because we had ground that flooded out, put silage on it, took it off, and then wanted to have something on that ground to try and catch what leftover nutrients we had and maybe get a little grazing out of it in the fall. We've been doing that ever since then. Started flying on cover crops in 2010 after a couple experiments in '08 and '09, and that's worked really well. I've done a lot of different cover crop trials with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and it's been really interesting. I've learned all the ways what you're not supposed to do, and still trying stuff. So, all right, so the field we're on right now, some of it was taken for corn silage last fall, and the rest of it was harvested as regular grain crop. The silage ground we drilled right after silage harvest, and that's all straight rye. And behind me, this cornfield was flown on rye because it looked like even in August last year that it was going to be a long wet fall, and I wasn't sure we were going to get done with harvest in time to get the drilling done. So we flew the rye on along with some rapeseed, and the take was all right. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty decent. And then we ran cattle on it all winter, and so they mowed it all off. So the ground that I'm standing on right now is almost black. The rye was mowed off so short. Took the herd off about a month and a half ago, and now we've got probably 4 to 6 inches of regrowth now. And so I put my cows back on it here yesterday, and they're pretty happy. So they've got about 90 acres to run on now of rye to graze. The corn stalks are pretty much played out. They took all the good stuff off of it last fall and over winter, so now they're just living on the rye, which obviously there's enough out here for the small herd I've got left now. So we're doing pretty good. We're standing pretty good on feed. One of the downsides of having an airplane fly on your seed is that you don't get perfect coverage. And the same thing with running a drill, you can't always get in the corners of the field, and so you've got to be planning for that. So off to my left, there's a couple patches on the edges of the field where the airplane shut off a little early, and so there's no cover crop there. And there's a few areas on the edges of this field I'm in where I turned the corner a little short with the drill, and so I've got nothing there. So I will have weed issues everywhere I don't have rye right now. I'll also have issues with compaction from the cattle in the areas where I don't have rye. The areas where the rye is growing, I'm not worried about compaction issues. We used to go and deep rip everything we ran cattle on in the wintertime. We'd deep rip it in the spring and then we'd plant, but we don't do that anymore because we don't need to. The rye roots do their job, and they break up all the compaction. The hard pan that we worry about is gone. And that's really been a wonderful thing to discover. It's taken several years. It didn't happen the first year, but it's taken several years of doing this every year, and it's really made a big improvement. We save fuel, we save time, and the deep ripper just sits parked in the row, so that's nice. So these spots, we'll probably just treat them like the rest of it. The area that it isn't large enough. There's not enough acres to worry about. It's just going to be a few problem areas in a much larger field, so it's not really something to be concerned about. It's just something to pay attention to. So the field we're standing in right now is part of what I'm considering my transition ground. Not transitioning to organic, but transitioning the farm into a new phase. I talked about earlier what we've done in the past and the diverse operation we had. I'm still doing all of those things, but to a much different extent. The field we're in right now is going to be converted over into CRP for the next 10 years. And the trees that are behind me, that's the Iowa River. This is all river bottom ground that we're on right now. And when the river floods, I'd be about neck deep in water. So it used to be that we'd get a flood in the springtime and it'd be quick up, quick down, no big deal. And that happened for 40, 50 years. Wasn't a big concern because usually it would happen early enough that we didn't have any crop in the field anyway. Well, the last 10 to 15 years, the climate has changed so much that we get floods every year that are catastrophic level. Instead of a quick up and quick down and maybe you get 6 or 8 inches of water flowing across the ground, we get feet upon feet of river water cutting across our ground. And instead of being up and down in 2 days, it's up for a week or more. And so when you've got that much of an impact from river flooding, the process, the system that you're using has to change. And I've pretty much given up trying to fight Mother Nature because there's no way I'm going to win that battle. So instead I'm going to work with Mother Nature. So this ground is going into CP23 mix, which is a wetland native grass mix. And my goal is to have tall grasses that get up growing taller than me, catching all of the sediment that flows down the river every time it floods, and I'll actually gain dirt. All my neighbors' dirt that's washing off their hillsides will end up on my farm. And I'll grow my soil faster than I possibly could have by myself. Eventually, this ground, being that it's going to be in native grasses, hopefully I can turn it over and convert it to pasture in 10 years. But we'll see how that plays out. The climate is changing, and I don't care what your politics are because they don't matter. I've watched this river go nuts so many times in the last 10 years. I don't care what the politicians say. The climate is changing and we're going to deal with it. And so this is my way of handling part of it. All right, so the field I'm standing in now is my rye for grain field. So this was seeded after soybean harvest, which was later than I wanted it to be. I think it was right around the 29th or 30th of October. Normally I want to get rye in the ground for grain harvest way earlier than that, but this last fall nothing dried down fast, so I was not alone in a delayed harvest and then a delayed seeding. But the rye's looking pretty good right now. The stand's acceptable. It's not fantastic, but it'll still grow a pretty good yield. I'm hoping on this ground to get somewhere 45, 50 bushel rye should do pretty good, assuming we continue having warm weather. Last spring's weather was not conducive for rye growth for seed, and a lot of guys I knew didn't get very good yields. My yields were off by 20% probably. So I'm hoping this spring, being that it's already warm, I get lucky and get the yields that I'm aiming for. So the rye that comes off of this field is all for cover crop seed. So I've got an application in right now with the Iowa Crop Improvement Association to get this as certified seed. They're usually backlogged, so I don't know when I'll hear from them, but hopefully I can get this certified, and that way it'll be a higher quality product to sell to customers. So this ground is one of our better producing fields. It's really good high quality Tama soils, and normally it'll put out 220 to 230 bushel corn, dry corn for yield. And I've got it in rye, and I'll make more net profit on the rye than I will on corn or soybeans this year. And if anybody's been watching the crop markets lately, you know almost anything makes more money than corn and soybeans this year. So it's not that hard. But even in good years, my cover crop seed costs me less to produce, and I can sell it for just as much or more than I can my soybeans. And it allows me then to come in the summer with different kinds of cover crop mixes, or I could frost seed clover in. I've done both many times in the past. I've been raising small grains for cover crop seed since 2015 or thereabouts. And so I've been playing around with it quite a bit, trying to get better at growing small grains. It's something that everybody in this area grew 50 years ago, but then they went away from it due to market factors and the fact that crop insurance pays better for corn and beans. I see the future to be more diverse for crops, for farmers to grow. We have the most productive soils in the world. We only grow 2 things, and that's dumb. So it's ridiculous that we can't grow anything else. And it's not that we can't, really. It's just that we don't. Everybody makes excuses, and they always boil down to, oh, well, the numbers don't allow for it. But if you sit down and you crunch your numbers, there's no good reason to raise corn or soybeans. If you sit down and figure out your time, your effort, and the investment in your equipment, you could grow anything and still make as much or more than corn and soybeans. So it's in our heads, not in our pocketbooks, that makes the decision. And so that's part of the transition that I'm making on our farm, is to stop being married to two crops and to go after the things that actually are going to make enough profit that I can live comfortably. Because we shouldn't be fighting every year just to break even. So I love it when I hear somebody say that we're feeding the world, because I have never seen anyone sit down to a bowl of number 2 yellow corn and just chow down on it. And that's what we grow here. We don't grow food. You don't eat the corn coming out of the big fields. That's feedstock for an industrial system that is incredibly complex and very diverse in all the products that we can make out of corn. But corn itself that we grow now isn't food. It becomes products used in food. That's not the same thing. The soybeans we grow isn't for human consumption directly. It's used in a complex process for lots of different products, some of them used for food. But the soybeans themselves are not direct human food. They could be, but they aren't. So we aren't feeding the world. So why even bother saying that? We can grow anything. We can actually grow real food. I could take this rye, mill it, and I could have rye flour directly. But I'm going to sell it for cover crop seed because it's worth more. Food grade is good for pricing, but seed price is better. So the money plays out better on that. So yeah, so some of the stuff I'm saying is kind of inflammatory, but that's just who I am. I have had lots of conversations with my folks. This is a family farm. I am the 6th generation on it. So I have a lot of history going behind me and a lot of expectations and hopes and dreams of those before. And I'd like someone to be after me to take up the reins also. And so my argument has always been that I am not farming this just for me. I am farming for the next generation and the one after, as my parents did for me and the one after me. So my folks, they back me. They don't necessarily understand everything I'm doing or why, but neither do I, so it's all right. The neighbors watch and wait. I've got a lot of neighbors doing cover crops, and then I have other neighbors that believe that tillage is the only way to be a good steward of the land. And it's difficult to convince somebody else that what you're doing is the right thing to do if they don't see you succeeding at it every single time. And so we've been doing it long enough. With the cover crops, we've pretty well got the ones that are convinced that those work well. Raising small grains, I've had a few neighbors do small grains in the past because I was doing it, and they keep talking about wanting to get back in to do a little bit here and a little bit there. So we'll see how that plays out. The crop markets the way they are right now might encourage them to try something different, just simply because nothing makes money. So if you're going to lose money over here, why not try something new and lose money there? Or make money there, you don't know. So it's a challenge always to buck the trend or to step outside the paradigm, but it's time. All right, so this field was my rye field last year. And so after harvest, I came in and drilled in an extremely diverse cover crop seed mix in August. And so what's growing now is what survived the winter. We had the fan turned up on the combine, so I blew all of the light rye out the back. And so we had a pretty solid, at least bushel to 2 bushel an acre cover of rye itself, along with all of the other stuff I planted out here. The mix I got, I don't even know what all was in it. There was at least 20 to 30 species. I could identify maybe 10 to 15 of them. Here's some things that survived. We've got purple top turnip, that's a radish, and he's just getting ready to start blooming. So we'll have lots of little flowers out here pretty soon for the bumblebees. And here's another turnip that looks like he probably started germinating this spring. So some of the seed was a little harder and didn't grow. But there's vetch, there's all kinds of stuff out here, and the more diverse the cover crop mix, the faster the soil regenerates and the better this ground will do for a crop in the next couple of years. So I'm going to see results from 1 year of a highly diverse cover crop mix. I'm going to see the results of that for the next probably 5 years on this ground, and this ground really needed some help. Other farms of ours really produce really good corn and soybean yields. This particular area does not, because it was depleted before we used it. And we did what we could to bring it back, but honestly the best thing to make soil become as productive as we'd like it to be is to put on cover crops and treat it like Mother Nature wants to, not work it to death, not let it wash down. So one of the fun things about growing diverse cover crop mixes, especially ones that you start in late summer, is you actually get to eat sometimes some of your cover crops. And so one of the nice things with raising turnips or radishes is in the fall they're actually sweeter than in the spring, because they're storing all of these sugars to be able to withstand all those frosts and freezes. And so they get super, super sweet. And they're delicious. I don't like spring raised turnips. I never liked turnips. But I've been eating turnips all winter long, that I come out to this field and just pick whatever looks good. And it's been pretty kind of neat. And I got a couple neighbors that they come out and they'll pick turnips and radishes and whatever else. So don't think of cover crops as just something to leave out there for all the critters to get at. You can eat them too. So given the fact we do a lot of planting green or planting into heavy, heavy residue, we use a no-till white planter. It's an older model, but it's just fine for this application. We didn't modify the planter much at all. It's got heavy-duty down pressure springs, so we can get 300 pounds of down pressure if we need it. Usually we don't. After the second year of cover crops, I don't use that highest setting anymore. But we do have modified press wheels at the back to get the trench to close. And we put on spiked, what are they called? Copperheads, make them, the furrow closers. And I went cheap, and I only did one side of a two-sided unit, and it works great. Works good in tilled ground, works good in our no-till, and the ultimate goal being we want to make sure that seed trench gets closed, because I had a mistake several years ago where we didn't get the seed trench closed, and then we came in and sprayed the burn down on the standing rye, and the herbicide damaged the seedlings in the soybean crop because I didn't have the trench closed, so it had direct contact to the seed. So it's a mistake that I learned very quickly and never made again. So one of the beautiful things about cover crops is that on ground that's hilly or rolling, we don't lose any more soil. The water coming off of this field is clean. It's clear, it's beautiful. I'm not losing any more topsoil than we already have. Iowa started out with what, 8 feet of black dirt? And I have neighbors that farm clay hillsides now. Where did it all go? It all went down to the bottom and away. And we need to stop exporting our greatest commodity, which is our soil. And so I'm doing everything I can to keep the soil I've got and to build more. All of this material behind me, all of this residue, is building my organic matter, and it's storing carbon. And as long as I don't come in and tear it all up and ruin what I just did, I'm gaining ground and I'm helping the environment as a whole. And that's something we all need to remember, that we're not the only ones that are on this ground, and we're not the only ones that are affected by what we do on our farms.